Hey there, and welcome to Time to Lean, the podcast where you air your dirty laundry and we help you clean up your shit. I'm Crystal Britt.
And I'm Laura Danger. Think of us as your household secret weapon, taking your questions and voicemails to navigate the wild world of gender norms and household dynamics.
We dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of how broader social issues impact our everyday lives.
So don't be shy, send us your dirty laundry.
And we'll help you clean up your shit.
This is Time to Lean. Welcome back, everybody. This is Laura and Crystal with Time to Lean.
Hello.
And how are you, Crystal?
I'm good. I am tired, but I am good. I've got my 2 drinks. I'm missing my Holy Trinity water to complete the Holy Trinity of ADHD girl beverages, but we've got 2 out of 3, so that can't be bad.
Yeah, I've got water, coffee, and a protein drink. So I win.
That's what the 3 are. Yeah. Yep. You won. You get it. You hit it this morning.
Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
100%. I don't start a day without those 3.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about something that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. This is, I want to say, one of the most integrated, intertwined, tangled up issues that will forever be a part of all relationships. And it seems like the thing that, at least for me, is continuously hard to navigate. Mm-hmm. And that is figuring out how to make decisions in a partnership or within a relationship while considering the impacts that it makes to everything else, right? Like we talk about the ways that we are interconnected, so are all of our actions. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. It's not a small issue, fully intertwined like a Gordian knot. And something that I think, especially as we're like wrapping up summer and taking in, like last week, our back to school episode resonated with a lot of people. And so as we talk about like decisions that each of us make and the ripple effects like out to our families and out to like wider systems, I think is super important. So I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of context. I've been pouring through all of these interviews and like emails and DMs and like notes that I've taken from talking to people, because I am finally nearing the end of these edits on this book that I'm excited to get out there. And there is, it's been like 4 years now since I started talking about weaponized incompetence, and we talk about the nag paradox. And there are very murky lines. And one of the things that comes up repeatedly is this tension between bringing somebody into a conversation and letting them have their opinion, or trying it and learning and all of that, and like the benefits of being in control when you have more experience and background.
Yeah. Which in a relationship is clearly difficult to navigate, because a lot of the times, like the primary caregiver, like I mean, for me, it even goes back to like, how do you even determine what the primary caregiver, like who that is, right? And typically in a cis hetero relationship, it's the woman, because they were the birthing partner, or they are the partner who, when the baby cries, is the first one up off the couch, right? Which is bonkers to me. So like, that's how it starts.
Okay, now here's where I'm going to come in. I got a lot to say on this, especially because I'm so deep into it. So something that I found very interesting, I did a bunch of research on the data behind that. Exactly what you were just saying is like, how do we get ourselves into this mess with parenting or house labor, whatever? And it, regardless of sexuality or the gender of the people who are having the child, So there were studies that I looked at where parents were gender nonconforming, trans, queer, heterosexual. It was all sorts of family structures. And like across the board, a birthing parent or a biologically related and or birthing parent spent more hands-on time like holding the baby and attending to basic needs for the first year of birth, after birth, sorry. So like one of the studies I read, it was a small amount of people they followed, but it was lesbian parents had an unequal division of labor when it came to childcare in the first year. However, their housework remained equally divided during that time. And then after a year, it evened out.
That's really interesting.
And
like I find both of those really interesting, that like the childcare was different, but the household still stayed equal. That's interesting. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
And the same thing didn't happen for, no surprise. It didn't happen with heterosexual partnerships, but it is like, it's just interesting data to look at.
Yeah. 100%. Especially, I mean, looking at something like Mother Brain, right? Like taking apart, where Chelsea Conaboy takes apart the idea of like maternal attachment and maternal intuition and like those kinds of things, is also very interesting to consider what happens, what hormones are released, what bonding hormones are released, and what happened biologically for men and women in heterosexual partnerships, in gay relationships, those kinds of things. It's very interesting how quickly, because I feel like too, and this was, I mean, for me, I experienced postpartum depression. So part of it is also that it was so much of a survival mode, that you do so much of it without thinking, right? That so much of it is just kind of like, well, I've just like got to get through and keep going. So there's not a lot of forethought or pre-planning to how are we going to do this, or there may be, and it might get thrown out the window.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this before. Like there are a million reasons why someone might, why an unequal division of labor might happen. Like there's data at least for teenagers age 15 to 17. And this is like multiple American time use surveys going back, I don't know how far, at least to the early 2000s, that say that girls do more housework than boys. And they do more like community service. They have less leisure time. So it goes back to an early day in people's lives. And then you have to think like, what are the impacts of that? Like,
right.
What does that turn into down the line?
Right. Like what are the repercussions of those statistics being true? Right. And it's super interesting to see, like with my own kids, to notice the differences and the differences in my pre-programmed responses of like, if my son doesn't immediately get up to do it, sometimes I will ask my older daughter to like, can you just do it for me? Right. Like the very like knee jerk automatic. And then I notice it and go, actually, oldest daughter, you sit down. Middle son, get off your ass and put your switch down and go do the thing that I asked you to do. Because I told him last week, I was like, I'm literally going to put, okay, hold on 1 second, on his gravestone. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, no, get up. Get up, please. I need you to do something.
My nickname around the house is Butt Mommy.
Yeah.
But Mommy.
Yep.
But Mommy.
Butt Mommy. Yep. Hard relate.
Why are you calling Mom Butt?
You're calling Mom a butt. Well, my favorite thing is when they say Mom and then wait for me to respond. I told them yesterday, I said, hey, listen, can we all practice this? Don't say my name before you, or say my name and then ask me the question. I'm listening. I'm never not listening. In general, what's interesting, and like we kind of are grounding around this idea of like how do you decide who's doing what research about what problems? Because I have experienced this in my relationship lately, like in the past like 6 months, this is something that Ben and I have talked about to want to like dive more into, because it like comes up in such subversive ways where I get to a point where I'm like, I wasn't born with this knowledge. I'm not innately gifted with a talent for reading the kids' emotions. It may be one of my strengths, but I did a lot of reading on it also. And the stuff that I suck at, I also did a lot of research on. So I think that component is also very interesting, like figuring out how people come to knowledge when it comes to parenting, or when it comes to like, I was on an ASMR like cleaning account yesterday, and somebody was like in the comments was like, how do you know, like, how did you learn how to clean all this stuff? Or like what tools needed to be used to clean something, or what, you know, tools would be most helpful in different situations. And for me, it's like, yeah, I like mostly I had to look all of that stuff up if I wasn't taught it by my parents.
Yeah, same. I've had to, over the years, hop online and be like, oh man, there's like stuff in the grout. Am I supposed to like replace grout, or am I supposed to like clean it? I don't understand. And those are things, God, I remember this is like, I remember not knowing how often I needed to get an oil change.
Mm-hmm.
That was just something like nobody thought to explicitly teach me.
Mm-hmm.
I knew they happened. I knew,
right. I knew they were a thing that existed. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think it was like, I was going to drive in college. I was driving from Chicago to Maryland, and the person I was driving with, their dad was like, make sure you put air in the tires. It's really icy out there. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, get an oil change before you go. It's like, what? Why? Huh?
Where would I even do that? Yeah.
I had I just didn't learn it. And so someone had to teach me. Yeah. But then what do you do? What do you do now that you're in your 30s and you're trying to navigate that? What do you do?
With a partner, or how do I navigate it myself?
With a partner. With a partner.
Oh, we get into fights about it. We get into fights about it. When we hit an impasse where typically the dynamic, and I feel, and this is true for couples that I've met with through Fair Play and through Persist, is the partner who's doing that work gets tired, or they reach a point where they're like, I am so tired, I can't do this anymore, or I literally don't have time to do this because I'm trying to put out all of these other fires. So other partner, I need you to step up. I need you to figure this out. Is usually how I come to it. And, or if it's something that like, because gender norms are not something that are like gender roles are not something that we play to in our household. If it falls under my purview, we'll research it. If it's something that falls under what we've kind of subconsciously put as Ben's purview, I'll ask him first. And then if I need him to follow up and research it, he'll do that also.
Yeah. Gosh, this really is such a touchy, like challenging topic, because it really is so intertwined with everything. Like, okay, we only have so much brain matter. And so decision fatigue is not just like a made up thing.
Right.
It is like making decisions. And there was a recent study from Darby Saxby and like another group. I know Eve Rodsky was involved with this. Like they used Fair Play as a part of the research here. And they found, this is so interesting. Obviously we know that an unequal division of labor is damaging. It's damaging to relationships. It can cause stress, inequity in leisure time, all of these things. Like there's financial costs. There's so many reasons why inequity in household tasks is a problem. They found that they interviewed mothers. For the mothers who did more of the mental labor, the damage was worse. So if there was more of an equal divide. I think I have to like dig into the actual particulars of what they figured out. But the conclusions that they came to were when there was an unequal divide in the physical tasks, the relationship was damaged. When there was an unequal divide in the cognitive load, there was damage to the relationship, and there was also increased stress, increased symptoms of depression. Like the wellness of the person who was reporting that was lower. So there were more symptoms. There was personal damage to the person who was doing more of the mental labor compared to the other person, or compared to when it was just a divide in physical tasks, I should say, because they didn't interview the other person.
Right. And I think that is so interesting and very telling, right? Like that would be consistent with like clinical work that I've done and anecdotally with books that I've read that before when we didn't have research to back that up. Because it is so isolating. I think the isolation is much more internalized and sometimes difficult to pinpoint and notice that that's what's going on. Because again, that mental load and that mental labor that goes on is one, subconscious. And like, I don't think that the number of people that I encounter that assume that their brains function like, or other people's brains function the way their brains function is like more often than not, right? Because that's just our assumption is that other people are just like us. And when they discover that it's not, or that there isn't that much space that, you know, maybe their partner has like much more brain space because they aren't thinking about all of the same things that they are thinking about, or are not putting in effort where they assumed that they were putting in effort, it can feel very isolating and lonely to know, like, because it's also expected. Like number two, it's expected of people who are socialized as women, where it's like, well, that's just like how women's brains work. Like you just do that. Like, why are you worrying so much about it? Why is it that big of a deal?
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about something that we've talked about. Sometimes in this dynamic where one person is, you know, carrying the brunt of the decision making and gets fed up, and they're for whatever reason, I want you to step into this with me. How about you choose the dinners, you choose the vacation spot, like, or whatever, you know, you pick out the school clothes. It can come up because of this fight. I've heard this fight a million times from so many people is you always get your way. And then here's the other side of it. Here, it's like a choose your own adventure. You always get your way. And then the other person will say, well, you choose poorly, or you don't give, like, if you want to do it, you can, but you never volunteer. What are the other things that I've heard in this? Yeah, like I try, and then I always get it wrong. And it's like this constant cycle of fighting because everyone's not on the same page. I think to your point, that if there's a primary caregiver or a primary decision maker or a domestic engineer or whoever, it is especially exhausting because they are considering everyone. And so the decisions that they often have to make are the ones that consider everybody else but them. So they are weighing all of the things. And so when their partner says, well, you always get your fucking way.
We do it the way you want to do it anyway. And
then the person is like, are you fucking kidding me? All I ever do is think about all of you. And it's this like not seeing each other. And so, okay, you try to fix that problem, right? And you say, fine, I always get my way. You do it. You pick. And then they think that they won, or they make a decision that isn't considering everybody. And it does suck. And then, great, where do we go from here? Because I'm mad at you and you're mad at me. And nothing is solved.
That's really interesting. where do you go from there? Because I feel like there's a very much like, there's a temptation to respond if you are the partner who was like, fine, you do it. You just, right. There is that component of wanting to come back to your partner when that decision sucks. And maybe that partner says it first, right? Like, I guess you were right. Are you happy? Like, are you happy now? Which is also problematic because that doesn't do anything to fix the original problem. All that means is then that the non-decision making partner is like, well, you see, you are better at it, so I'm never going to do it again. So they don't participate again. Do you know what I mean?
There's that. Yes, there's that. And then I've heard this a million times. This one, I've worked with multiple couples who have done this exact thing, and it's really hard to watch or to know what's appropriate. Anyway, something that I hear a lot is, I did it and it was easy. Why don't I stay home? And then they'll stay home for a little bit, or they'll do the babysitting, or I did the cleaning. It was easy. You're constantly on my ass about the household. You're constantly on my ass about the household. Do you know how easy it is? Look, I knocked it out. Or the childcare thing where, when it's a parent who hasn't, or when it's the caregiver who isn't around much, like a mother-in-law or a father-in-law, and they're like, they were great for me. I don't know what, they were great for me. Give them to me. I'll whip them into shape. They won't be crying so much if I was around. And it's like, again, feeling totally unseen, not seeing the decision-making. It's like, it would be hard if you were also doing all of the other stuff. If you were thinking it through so deeply, it would be hard. Because you're not doing it the same way.
Right. Because you're not doing it the same way. And here's the thing. Like, I will admit that even in my own life, there are situations where I don't necessarily think it's overthinking, because that's not, I feel like that focuses too much on like the cognitive process. It's the heavy emotional layer of the repercussions and oversaturating myself with the possible scenarios. And I think because of my work and because of the way my brain works and the amount of research and reading that I do, that I can be oversaturating myself with information. So there are certain things where, like, in therapy or in a conversation with a friend, right? Like, I will gauge, I will try and gauge, or if it's just taking up too much rumination space in my brain, right? Of like, okay, this is bordering on obsession. This is something that I can let up a little bit. So I think that, first of all, I think that it is like a collective liberation idea for both partners. And I am like speaking to myself in this instance, to know that there are things that I can learn. Like, I can't believe in something like collective liberation and intersectionality without recognizing that there are things that I need from my partner that I can't give to myself, and that there are things that I have that he can't give to himself or that he is better at. You know what I mean? Like, it's not toward either of those ideas for me to be like, well, I just know better because I've done this research, or I know, but see, like, I'm waiting for you to fail because I told you so. And I know how this is going to go. And to take a hierarchical, like, to hold that over him, because that feels like shit too. Right? Like, that's not going to repair or mend a relationship either. But I think that it's okay in relationships to call things out when you see them, of like, hey, I feel really alone in this space because my goal is not to be right. Like, I don't want to be correct. What I want is for us to be connected as a family. I want to feel connected to you. I don't want to fight all the time about these things. And I know that this is going to sound crazy, but I think that, like, in my head, when I think about things like that, I think of fights at a boardroom table. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I feel like I'm like fighting against my partner, and this is also going to be controversial, but it's such a familiar feeling to me growing up and learning about relationships, that there is something in me when I feel justified about something, it's an indicator to me that the distance between me and my partner is probably much wider than I'm even aware that it is, because now now I've moved into transactional. Does that make sense? Like, it makes me feel,
does.
I feel more combative and protective. I go full protect turtle mode.
Oh yeah.
When I feel attacked.
I think that's really tricky. It's really tricky because if you're having a conversation with someone who is assuming, like, I'm going back to conversations that I've witnessed where it's like, you always get your way. We always do it your way. And you're always mad at me about the way I do it. And so how am I supposed to step in because you're mad at me about the way I do it? In those circumstances, it feels like the opening of the conversation it's combative already.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like, I understand that I do the same thing because it feels like an accusation of like, we're doing it your way. And it immediately feels like, okay, but I put a lot of thought into this. And like, could you try to see my side of it and
right.
what I'm talking about? So I think that it's really hard to have a conversation if the other person who maybe, seemingly they're saying, I want to be invited into this, like, let me be a part of these decisions, if they aren't curious.
Yes.
Like
100%.
If they're not curious, how are you going to have that conversation at all?
Yes.
And to that point, like you said, like the person who is trying to bring the other person in needs to be curious.
Right. And I do think that being curious, because it is also a thing of, you can't convince someone that something is a problem if they don't think that it's a problem, because that's where they are like, you're always getting on me. This is not, in situations where I've witnessed couples, there's not an openness or an interest in learning or questioning. There's not an objective curiosity, which is what in therapy I try and teach clients to do internally, individually, of, hey, can we not place a value judgment on what you're doing? Can we try and hold objective curiosity? If this was a friend, what would you ask them about this? How would you get more information about what's going on with them? Because you're right. If one partner is already, well, you're always on me about this, I can't do anything right. You can't have a conversation. The only thing you're going to have is a fight. And then for me, I spiral. If I'm there, I'm not even saying anything important at that point. I'm like fighting to try and either fix it in a really not helpful way, or to me, and I would probably need to actually read the Gottman's book on conflict to have any indicator of this, but I would imagine that helpful conflict is one where you're not fighting and like yelling at each other and operating out of high emotion. It's when you step back and go, okay, we're both really frustrated and really upset, so we need to put this on pause and we need to revisit it a little bit later. And then every time you try and have that conversation, if it gets heightened, that's an indicator we need to stop and then try and come back to it, which I know I think takes practice. And I think, again, both partners have to have a semblance of curiosity and an openness to learn, which cannot, that's the opposite of a defensive stance. And each person has to own their own defensiveness. Because if the other partner owns that defensiveness for them, that continues the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I think, the challenge that we continue to butt our heads up against when we talk about this with anybody. Like, yeah. I know in your work, in my work, like, just is culturally, we often approach conversations as if it is a fight. Mm-hmm. And somebody's going to come out on top. And so here's my thing. I think that if you are in a relationship with somebody and they are stuck in this loop with you, and every time you try to talk about it, it's just like not going anywhere, or like you said, you keep wanting to be like, well, I can't, like, it feels like we're not hearing each other. Let's pause and come back to it when our emotions are lower. I think the decision at that point is, what are you looking for? Do you want them to understand you? Do you think that's a realistic outcome? Are you trying to get on the same page? Are you trying to offload cognitive labor? Because there's a logistical aspect of that where you can talk to them about the logistics. Or are you trying to solve this emotional communication pattern?
Yeah.
Because like I, you know, it seems like there are elements of this that can be separated out. And I think that a lot of people question, like, okay, I think that a lot of people get to a point where they're like, my partner's never going to understand this. Now I need to accept or move on. I need to figure out if this is sustainable and if there are enough benefits to remain in this relationship. And if there are, how am I going to not kill myself, run myself into the ground? And honestly, I think that's where fair play is a good solve.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree, because I think that is, I think what's so interesting too is when people find fair play and maybe it's the opposite order of approach, because I think it's really interesting to think about separating the transactional versus the emotional components of a relationship. Like you're using the word logistical. In my brain, I'm categorizing that as transactional, because I do think that for primary caregivers, those things get enmeshed. And I do I'm wondering, like, is there, I mean, my autistic brain, I'm like, yeah, sure, you could definitely separate those out. I don't know what that's like for non-autistic brains. Like, can you separate some of those things out? Because it's the thing of the marriage between, but when you don't take out the trash, it says to me that you don't give a shit about me. Right. And so, like, because that's where it gets really sticky and frustrating of like, no, this is, and I mean, maybe you can speak more toward this since you're writing about it and have read Care, the Highest, what is it? The Highest Form of Capitalism, that book of like, that's where I feel like, you know what I mean? Like the intersection or the intertwined nature of transactional and emotional aspects of care.
That's where I feel like we talked about this, like when we first started recording this podcast. There is this person named Anfisa from 90 Day Fiancé. And she ended up partnering with this guy who paid for everything. And they got into this argument where I think he said something like, you know, you're only with me for the money. And she was like, you're only with me because of my looks. And she wasn't like upset about it. She was just telling the truth. And that is the basis of their relationship. And it's fine. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, I don't know how healthy that is in the long run. And I don't know if everybody is going to choose that, but I think it's something worth acknowledging, where if somebody that you are cohabitating with or co-parenting with, or, you know, if you have a relationship with somebody who sees you in a transactional way, if they see the world through this lens, do you just accept that that's going to be the way you relate to them? Because maybe they like, I think it isn't. I do think it is not considerate to take your chores seriously. It would hurt my feelings if somebody didn't do that, even though it might not, that's not what they mean to do.
Right.
And so if I'm in that scenario, I do need to sort that out. What am I willing to accept? And am I okay with living the next 40 years with somebody who doesn't see the world through the same lens as me and doesn't see those as acts of care? And is that okay? Like, or I don't think there's an easy answer.
I think it's less, is that okay, as am I okay with that?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because I think that's a very interesting thing too, that I watch clients do, where they're like, well, what they want me to tell them that's okay. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if it's okay with me. I don't have to live your life after we hop off this phone call. You know what I mean? So I think it's also okay to be like, individually, like, this is not okay for me. This might be okay for some people. This isn't okay for me. And that's great. That's really interesting. Because I do think too, there is an element of feeling like grass is always greener, but also you don't have that context unless you have that experience also. And so it's vulnerable and risky. Here's my other question. Like, if you are in a space where it's a situation, can we talk a little bit about what it's like to allow your partner to try something and then for them to fumble it or fail at it? And like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, good point. Because I feel, we're like talking about multiple things. And I think we sort of got that at the top. Is like, this is such a messy thing, because it's like so many people, it's so easy to slip into this, and the best intended people, like, the advice is let them try it, let them face the consequences, let them learn the skill. People need time to become efficient and proficient at these things. And I mean, what's so tricky is what happens when you tell them, okay, you want to check the emails from school, you want to take that responsibility, and then they don't, and then they miss a field trip, or the kids can't do Spirit Week and they're really, really upset. And you're watching your kids also, your partner is suffering the consequences, and the kids suffer the consequences.
I mean, in those scenarios, what's really interesting to me is that, like, because I'm thinking like in situations where you're like, yeah, this is not tolerable. This is not something I want to do for the next 40 years. So then you get divorced. You're still facing that same problem.
Yes.
Right. Only you have no, supposedly, like, assuming you have no influence over whether or not, right. Or you don't necessarily maybe have the same ability or right to, depending upon what, the co-parenting situation is and what that relationship is like, but is something that you would still encounter. And I do think, I think in not even necessarily metered doses, but like in deciding what's okay. Like, clearly we're not talking about, leaving your kids with your partner if they are truly not competent to provide that care. But I always think of when I was teaching stroller strides and I went to a Fit for Mom conference. And one of the things that she said that stuck with me, especially in that moment, was like, it was the CEO. It was like, hey, just know, like, when you get home, like, it's okay if your partner has not done things the way that you would have done them while you were gone. Like, that's okay. Your kids are okay. Like, the house may be a mess or what, all the stereotypical things, but it's okay to allow that. And I think too, for me, like me personally, and in other couples that I've seen, trying to also figure out what the level of what my level of tolerance is, and if that's realistic, because I was a stay-at-home mom for 8 years. So I can't, full time, it would be unrealistic. I can be mad that I agreed to that, and that as a couple, we came to that conclusion to do that for that time, but I can't hold my partner to that same expectation with information, like that he should have information that I gained during that time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hard parts, is like, you can't expect someone to have all of the same information. You can't expect them to feel, especially if it's been like a rough spot, you can't really expect them to not feel a little bit guarded or defensive or whatever. Because you do too. You can't expect them to have the same background, can't expect them to be totally like not have any defenses up, but being open, and also like asking questions about, do you have any tips for me when I take this on? Or like, there has to be leeway and a joint growth thing that happens. but yeah, I wanted to go back to what you said about incompetence or like safety. And there are so many reasons that people decide to stay married to somebody who isn't like a good fit for them.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, that decision making of like, if I stay, can I tolerate that? Is it going to be safer for everybody for whatever reason? If I
physically,
go,
mentally, emotionally, all of those things.
and, we are good friends with Olivia and Jenny of the Fresh Starts Registry. They have an incredible podcast and like a ton of resources, and also Decoding Couples. One of the hosts from Decoding Couples went through a trial separation with her spouse, like early days in the pandemic, and lived together and reconciled and are still married. And the other host is recently, I think like this week, she moved out of her home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like talking to other people who have made choices like this, because our entire lives are like a series of questions. And what is my level of tolerance? Do I expect my spouse to be as good and make the exact same decisions? And is that what you want?
Right.
Because some partnerships are like that.
Yeah.
Is it easier for you to be alone and make those decisions for yourself? I don't know.
Right. And I think it's very helpful to be able to like, even to just give yourself the space to consider those things in real time and like sit with your own feeling and knowing. And those are two great resources to explore for support, whether or not you're coupled, right? Like both of those things, both of those entities have amazing things to say about about divorce and separation and continuing to stay married. But yeah, it's a constant. I think it's very freeing to be able to have and know that other people are experiencing that same in between space or questioning or not knowing.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it before. I don't want to keep skipping past it. But something you said, basically it's like risk analysis.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, my first go-to, if I was like, hey, I've been totally in charge of the kids' schooling, the first thing I would do was maybe not hand off teacher communication. I think that would be a really rough one. I think maybe doing like having them do it and you be a backup for a little bit, like things like that. But even then you've run into this thing where it's like, are you undermining me? Like, do you doubt me that I can't do this?
I mean, and maybe in that case, if you're like wanting to play with the levels of responsibility, like it's also okay to talk with your partner about the level of involvement they want you to continue to have, right? It's also okay to say, hey, is it okay with you if I like keep an eye on the emails just to make sure, or if I check in with you to make sure? Because I know in Fair Play, it's like a no to check in on your partner. But sometimes if you're both worried about it, if they're worried they're going to let you down and you're worried they're going to let you down, do what works for you. Like, do what works for you guys as a couple. If one thing is going to, like, one way of doing it is going to lead to a lot of resentment for both of you, and the other way is going to lessen that a little bit, it's okay to play with that. Can I keep an eye on the emails for a couple weeks and then totally let go of it, depending upon how that goes? Like, that's also okay.
Yeah. Something I say to Jack a lot is just like, I'm an anxious person. I have, I'm like clinically anxious person.
Actually, legitimately anxious.
And you actually taught me this one. I'll just like soften it as much as I can. I'll just be like, I don't know if it's a rational anxiety or if it's like an anxiety I can particularly trust, or maybe it sounds silly coming out, but I feel anxious.
Yeah.
I feel anxious, and I think it would help me if I knew when this was going to be done by, or if it would be okay if I checked in with you. Me checking in is about my anxiety.
Right.
It's not about you. I feel anxious.
And that's the objective curiosity, right? Because like that is a genuine objective curiosity about yourself, right? And so it's a lot harder for your partner to take as you're attacking me because you don't think I can do it, right? And so I think approaching it in a way that owns your own stuff and tries to, I do that a lot as well, where I'm like, you know what? I've actually sat with this. This is actually a me thing, but I have to ask you this in order to process and work through it. You're giving them an opportunity to reply in a way that's also objective and kind instead of defensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Well, we found no answers. We came to no conclusions. But it's prevalent. It's a very prevalent, like you are submerged in it, writing about it. And I think is something, clearly that we see come up all the time with people that we see in our DMs, with people that we see, for coaching. It's a really difficult and individually based remedy to try and figure out what works for each individual couple, or if it doesn't work.
I feel like this is a topic that we could hit at every single angle forever and ever. And like you said, like it really, it's an ongoing thing. I don't think there is any particular answer. I feel like, being a parent, it just happened yesterday. My kid got really upset because she wanted Jack to take a picture of a piece of art before it got erased. And he didn't hear her because earlier she said she was like, don't do that. And so it got erased. And then she was really, really mad. And he and I had to like stare at each other. We were parked outside of getting ice cream. And it was like, cool, she's freaking out and not in a kind way. And now we don't, and we just stare at each other and it's like, what are we going to do in this moment? Mm-hmm, we have to be on the same page. Are you going to take this? And that's honestly, like, maybe that's something I'll leave with. I've been trying to work on this. You take it or I take it and we stick with it. Yep. And then later we will talk about it because I get stuck on, I am so worried about the long-term repercussions of how we are raising our kids. I'm so nervous about it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it is not to a healthy extent. Yeah. Sometimes it is.
Right. For sure.
Sometimes it's not. But be in the moment being like, no ice cream for you. Or me being like, let's talk through our feelings. Like in the end, I think it's probably healthier for them to just see both parents get on board for the same decision in the car.
Right.
And we'll figure it out later.
Right. And we can figure it out later. And that's something that I actually told a client a couple of weeks ago. Like, remember, contextually, making a decision like that is not going to make or break a long-term situation. Like it's always patterns. And so it's also okay. Here's the other thing that I also think about a lot, especially when it comes to parenting. We are, I feel like, one of the first generations to put this much goddamn thought and research into parenting, right? I'm like, listen, there's literally no possible way to do it perfectly, because to do it perfectly would prevent your kids from harm, and even any kind of harm. And even in that case, that's harmful. You don't want to do that for your kids. So the best we can do is to assume that we're doing a lot better than how we felt like we were raised as a generation. So it's okay.
It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. You can close Instagram. You can turn off the parenting podcast for a week. It'll be okay, which is hard. Like I'm speaking to myself.
Yep.
Always and forever speaking in this podcast to myself.
Okay. Everybody, you can find us on Patreon. We have a free version. We have a paid version. There are resources you can get on there for free or as a paid Patreon, paid patron. We also have book clubs every month. This month we are reading White Feminism by Koa Beck and Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. You do not have to have read either one or both of them. It's a discussion-based virtual book club that lasts about an hour and a half. You can participate or you cannot. It was great last time. And we have one every month through the end of the year.
Yep. And you can pre-register on timetoleanpod.com, or you can check us out, like Laura said, on Patreon. You can sign up for free and get those notifications too.
All right. Anything else?
I think that's it. I think that's all for announcements. We'll see you guys.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Time to Lean. Your questions and stories are what keep us going, so keep those voicemails and messages coming.
Until our next episode, remember that you can always find us on social media and, of course, in your podcast feed. You can also subscribe for $5 a month on Spotify for uninterrupted episodes and bonus content.
We're so grateful for your support. See you next time.